It's time for Lori on Liberty on 94.9 News Now. And here she is, Lori Hopkins-Cavanagh.
Welcome to Lori on Liberty. I'm Lori Hopkins-Cavanagh. If you like this show, like me on Facebook, Lori Hopkins-Cavanagh. Also follow me on Twitter at Lori on Liberty. And you can send me an email at lorionnliberty@gmail.com. Today, you are welcome to call in. And we have an incredible guest with us. He is a surprise guest, and I wanted to withhold his information specifically because this is going to be one of the most interesting interviews I've done in a very long time, and we've had some great interviews with incredible people. But there's a Republican registered, running, announced in Massachusetts who's taking on U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren. And his name is Shiva Ayyadurai. And we're going to call him Shiva today. He is an entrepreneur, a scientist, and I would say anything further from anything you can imagine as a politician. And isn't that what we want? I think that Trump's appearance on the world stage as leader of our country, as president of our country, has proven one thing, that the people, everyday people, middle-class people, no longer want politicians to go to Washington, D.C. So Trump, as a real estate developer, an entertainer, and an extremely smart, capable businessman, went to the White House. Elizabeth Warren is your consummate politician. And the lies that she has told are just incredible. She has a problem with the truth. I think a lot of liberals have a problem with the truth, whether it be climate change, whether it be guns, whether it be education and gender identity. They have a problem with scientific fact. They have a problem with, I think, just reality in general. And Elizabeth Warren, one of the things that she said, and a lot of people attribute this to President Obama, but Elizabeth Warren is the one who coined the phrase, "You didn't build that." And I don't think there was a single phrase in the entire election that bothered me more than when President Obama used Elizabeth Warren's words, "You didn't build that." It made me furious because I have been an entrepreneur and a business owner my entire life, other than a fray with running for Congress in the 2nd District against Joe Courtney. And now Shiva is in the studio today, and he's a fascinating man. We're going to find out about his background. He is from India, born in India, came over when he was 12 years old as an immigrant, and he's done remarkable things in his life, but he's not a politician. He's finding himself in a position that is extraordinarily interesting, and I think that Massachusetts right now is less liberal than Connecticut. And we're going to have a debate on that very shortly, because what Shiva told me off the air, we're going to talk about the Republican Party in Massachusetts and in Connecticut. We're going to talk about what's happening in Washington, D.C., Trump. We're going to talk about a lot of different issues that are going to be fascinating. And I want you to be part of the conversation, so please call in 860-464-9490, 860-464-9490. Shiva, welcome to Lori on Liberty.
Thank you for having me here, Lori. It's great to be here.
It is a pleasure to have you in the studio. And we were talking before the show started about the Republican Party. You find yourself running as a Republican. Were you always registered Republican in the United States since you came over?
No.
Since you were 18,
yeah,
I should say.
Just one correction. I came here when I was 7.
I thought it was 12.
No,
okay.
and then I went back to India when I was 12 and came back for a brief period. But small correction. Everything else was right on. So here's my journey into politics. You know, when I was 17 or 18 at MIT, I basically recognized that both establishment parties weren't serving the people. There was a brief time, remember there was an anti-establishment candidate. There's this thing called the Rainbow Party. Mm-hmm. And at the last minute, if you remember, Jesse Jackson, who turned out, frankly, to be an Uncle Tom, gave all of his votes to Mondale, saying Reagan was so evil. Mm-hmm. And that's when I realized that there are really three dynamics in U.S. politics or in world politics. The establishment, the change agents, like everyday people who may not be perfect, who are trying to figure out how to change the world, And then there's something even more insidious called the not-so-obvious establishment, people who talk a good game. They say they want to help people, hope, change, revolution, like Bernie Sanders. You can.
Would you call them progressives?
Well, I call them social democrats, to the right term, who basically are there to confuse the people who want change and funnel them back to the establishment.
So you would consider Elizabeth Warren a socialist Democrat?
A social democrat. Mm-hmm. A social democrat. And, their existence has been talked about for many years as a group of people who exist to keep the establishment in power. So if you look at the last election, you had the establishment represented by Hillary Clinton. In fact, what was remarkable was the Romneys, the Bushes, the Obamas all supported Hillary. It was basically the confluence of the establishment coming together. And then you had the change agents on the street, Tea Party, whoever you want to call it, Green Party even, Donald Trump being the agent of change there. And then what emerges out of there is people like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, who basically came out to basically confuse the masses as though they were change agents. But if you remember, what did Bernie Sanders do in the end? He gave all of his votes to Hillary Clinton.
And he got a nice house for it.
And he got a nice house for it. So, but this has been the recurrence in political history, not only in the United States, but globally. Mm-hmm. In India, the same thing happened. You had the British who were the establishment. Mm-hmm. In the 1920s, there were people who wanted to actually kick out the British, have a good revolution, which had been good for India. And then the British actually brought in Gandhi and Nehru, presenting them as the agents of change. Mm-hmm. That's why in India, you never really had significant change. You had 70 years of corruption. So I figured this out as an 18-year-old kid. So I, frankly, dislike both establishment parties. But when Donald Trump ran, I was, a citizen in 83. I had a disdain for both political parties. But when I saw Trump use that platform, as you earlier said, as a businessman, as a person who actually had built things, say that he could see the collusion between the mainstream media and the political parties, I said, I like this guy because he's not mincing his words. So I registered as an independent, voted for him. I was invited to his inauguration. Mm-hmm. And literally the day after his inauguration, I was so moved by his speech, I said, I'm going to register as a Republican. And 1 month later, I decided to run against Elizabeth Warren. But I've always been politically involved, and I can talk more about that. But for me, he was a necessary disruption to a system of governance that wasn't serving anyone. It wasn't serving everyday people. And so I think Trump, through a necessary, in some ways, it's like he shot another shot, like happened in Lexington, for hopefully a new American Revolution to take place. And that's what I saw his movement as.
Well, he, on the world stage, there are a lot of players and puppets, puppet masters, I should say, that aren't clearly defined. And I'd like to talk about George Soros and his impact. I'd like to talk about a lot of things, not right this minute, though. Trump has an incredible challenge ahead of him to be able to maneuver all these puppet masters and still be a nationalist, an economic nationalist, for example, in the United States as POTUS, is an amazing challenge. The time was right. Timing is everything, I believe, and I think that we needed Trump. He came at the right time, and that's why he won. Mm-hmm. And I think that the public has seen that even if they have what is called, I think, some bias on believing everything is just fine, that there is no corruption, there's no deep state, there's no, the government is really good. People's eyes have been opened with all of the media. WikiLeaks, for example, has opened a lot of eyes. The media, what they did with the DNC, collaborating with the DNC to take down Bernie Sanders, provide questions to Hillary before the debate. I think everybody's eyes are, you have to be completely blind not to see what is going on. Now, you're running in Massachusetts. You find that the state has its own issues. Is it a microcosm of what's going on in D.C.?
So, I think what's happened is, I have been fighting the deep state all my life, believe it or not. I grew up in India, which had the caste system, and America has a caste system. In many ways, a neo-caste system of the elites, of a self-serving group of elites, composed, you may call it the deep state. And so my journey has been, I'll talk more about that, has been fighting this deep state every step of the way. So I know how to fight these guys. In Massachusetts, you have the sewer, which feeds the swamp in Washington. Think about what Massachusetts, the elites, it has Harvard, MIT, all these big elite institutions. And many ways, the sewer rats are created in Massachusetts. Think about Jonathan Gruber, this guy at MIT, who basically was one of the architects of Obamacare, who thought people were stupid, and he still has a job at MIT. There's many, many people like this.
Yale's no different in Connecticut.
Yale's no different.
I'll do a lot of correlations between the two states, if you don't mind.
Definitely. So, having gone through the journey of having gotten 4 degrees at MIT, been an entrepreneur, I know these people well. And they exist by thinking they know better, that we don't, the everyday people don't know better. And that's why when you earlier talked about, these people have a very false sense of reality. They live in their ivory-towered institutions. Very few of them ever had to create jobs, ever had to go out there and take risks. And I'm talking about the self-serving academics. And they are sort of the heart of what I call the neo-caste system. In America and India, it was called the Brahmins.
Interesting.
Yeah, so, people throw Wall Street guys in jail. But has a professor at Harvard or MIT or Columbia or Yale been thrown in jail because they come up with false narratives? They're the fake news behind the fake news. Because most journalists don't do any more news reporting anymore. They literally cut and paste what some elite told them. And they literally cut and paste it, and they think that's the truth. But today, academics are pay to play. And there's a huge centralization
it's incestuous
of them.
too.
In the 1 mile radius around Cambridge.
Right.
And that is, if you remember Star Wars, if there's a Death Star that you want to take out, it's that group of people.
Academia.
And they've never been exposed fully. They're really the people behind the politicians, and the politicians work with them to come up with their theories for them and to justify false realities. Obama was part of that. Elizabeth Warren is part of that. Most of these guys come from there. And that's why I believe Massachusetts or Cambridge or even New Haven is an interesting place, because the centralization of power, the epicenter, is the academic elites, and no one has ever exposed them. And in Massachusetts, what you have is the rhinos in Massachusetts and the Democrats are in power-sharing collusion. It took me about 100 days to figure this out. They don't really want to beat Warren. In fact,
they feel safe with Warren. Warren makes them feel very comfortable.
Exactly. And so when we talk about quote-unquote Republicans, I think what we really need to talk about is who supports the centralization of power, which means, and it's quote-unquote Republicans and quote-unquote Democrats. And then there are those people who believe in the principles of the Constitution, which was that the founders believed that there was supposed to be a direct connection between I as an individual and my creator, that there wasn't supposed to be a monarch.
We'll get into unalienable rights in a moment, but I do want to talk to you about the caste system a little bit in India and the fact that your family was a lower caste.
Untouchables / deplorables. So the fact that my parents even made it here is sort of 1 in 100 trillion. When I came here...
That's really sad for me. I mean, the caste system in India has always bothered me deeply.
Yeah.
Because here in the United States, it's the ladders of opportunity. And in India, they don't have those ladders.
Right, so in India, what you have is it's where you're born into decides your actual vocation in life. So the fact that my mom and dad even got educated, they're incredible people. They just on their pure sense of who they were and the journey they went through. So
now, are they still alive?
My mom passed away about 6 years ago, and my dad's still alive.
Right.
Yeah, but my mom
your father must be very proud of you.
Yeah, they're fighters. They're fighters, and they believe in truth. They left India because of the fact that they hit a ceiling for growth here. So they came to America where they saw a future for their kids. And they've always been fighters, Now,
India must have gone to must be changing slightly because you have the industrialization, the economics have grown and flourished. India has flourished in many ways. So has that affected the caste system in India?
Well, yeah. So if you look at the history of the caste system, I studied this deeply because I was very interested when I came as a freshman at MIT. But the caste system was very deep in India, very draconian, up until the 8th century. And like the Protestant Reformation movement, there was a Hindu Reformation movement, which some of the great spiritual leaders said, if there's equality in heaven, why isn't there equality on earth? It's a very fundamental question. So between the 8th century to 15th century, you have this very powerful movement, a spiritual movement, which actually starts breaking down the caste system. So when the British came to India in the 16th, 17th century, they actually came at a point where there was the emergence of entrepreneurs, merchants. These people were actually being elevated.
A middle class,
A middle class was developing. And so they were trading, right? The British, the French, the Portuguese came. But what's interesting is the British actually became more greedy. They said, wait a minute, why do we need these emerging merchants or middlemen? Let's go prop up the old feudal lords. And they actually brought back in the 8th century caste system. So instead of imposing British law, they imposed pre-8th century Indian law. So a lot of Indians...
Interesting.
Yeah. So when Indian quote-unquote independence took place, it's fascinating. If you read the documents, it's not called the Declaration of Independence of India. It's called the Transfer of Power. So it went from white men with crowns to brown men with white hats. So what you had is India created a civil servant group. Hundreds of thousands of people actually oppressed Indians worse than the British did for 70 years. And the Gandhi family was part of that. Nehru, his daughter Indira Gandhi, his, then their son, etc. Modi's winning. Modi is like sort of the Trump of India. Modi was a tea seller, a small business person. Him winning in India, overwhelming the last election, was like a new wave took off. So that was a mini revolution that took place in India that should have occurred 70 years ago.
Wow, it was hindered by the British colonialism.
Colonialism and the Indian, I would say it's sort of quote unquote complicit to that, and they profited from it. It's like in Africa, right? The African slave masters were more abusive to the African people than
and this isn't the story that you're going to get in the textbooks, unfortunately.
Exactly. So Gandhi was essentially they promoted him as this great saint, but he was basically an agent of the British.
So you come over very young. So you were just a toddler back then. When you came over, 7 years old. So you were a young boy. And were you aware? Do you remember? Were you aware of this? These discrepancies?
Yeah, because see, I was extremely aware as a kid. When I was 5 years old, I still remember vividly. After I'd finished playing soccer, going to what I thought was a friend's home, and his mother would not let me in the house, forced me to stay out, and gave me water in a very different cup. And called me Shudra. Shudra is like the N word in India. And I'd never heard it. I asked my mom. She said, oh, yeah, that would happen to me when I went to the village. Well, they would say Shu, Shu, Shudra. So that's when I came to find out there was this caste system. So that moved me. And
Did you feel that? Did you feel discrimination? And obviously you're very successful. We'll talk about that as well. But when your family came over, did you feel included? Did you feel like you were ostracized? What was it?
Well, here was the thing. My mom would say in India, you can get discriminated 7 different ways. In America, maybe 2 or 3 different ways. So it's a relative issue, right? So we came originally to Paterson, New Jersey. Remember, this is in the 1970. Vietnam War is still going on.
Tough time.
You have sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So this very Indian family moves to the heart of Paterson, New Jersey, which is predominantly African American. And then we moved to Clifton.
Culture shock.
Well, we learned, Bombay is like a industrial furnace. You have every caste, every religion, every color. So to me, it wasn't that different than Bombay in many ways. Then we went to Clifton, Parsippany, and Livingston, which is predominantly very wealthy, predominantly Jewish. So we went through the entire spectrum in 7 years, from one of the poor African American cities to one of the wealthy Jewish cities. All public school system. So my parents they didn't have school choice in those days.
No, they really don't.
But my parents created school choice for themselves by moving to the better public school systems.
Yeah. And that was a number. When I was growing up, I come from a middle class family. My mother was basically emigrated from Italy to the United States right after World War II. And it's a long story, but the thing is that education was something so valued by anyone that's suppressed, either by a caste system or middle class system or whatever the case may be. education was highly valued at
Right.
one time.
Well, in the Hindu system, there's two goddesses. One is a god of education and the god of wealth. And the story goes that the goddess of wealth is very jealous of the goddess of education. So if you want wealth, you go pay homage to the goddess of education. So,
that's very interesting.
right. So wherever there's education, the goddess of wealth will follow because she's very jealous of the goddess of education.
All right, so let's get into your religion, because that was
Yeah.
the first question. I am a Christian, and I believe that Christianity is under attack globally, especially in the United States, but you can see in the Middle East the genocide going on against Christians and different religious minorities, not just Christians, but they've basically been pushed out, minorities. You attended Catholic schools in India, you said, and we taught religion's very important to me. Not religion, God is very important to me. And I told you that I became closer to God through the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution. And that is what we were beginning to talk about, unalienable rights, and why our Constitution is so different than any other Constitution in the world. Now, do you consider yourself at this time a Christian? Is that what you...
Well, I consider, let me tell you, I was...
As a scientist, this is going to be interesting.
So here's the thing. See, I was born in two worlds. You see, when I grew up in deep South India also, I grew up around a very spiritual tradition. So I learned to pray, meditate, connect with God at a very young age. My grandmother was a poor village farmer. She'd work 16 hours. But she was deeply into God. In her home were all the great deities, including the picture of Christ. In the Hindu religion, we view Christ as a son of God. We don't discount the divinity of Christ in Hinduism. So, my grandparents were deeply, deeply religious. They would pray, meditate, go to temple. That was but deep Hindu mysticism. So for me, when I went to Catholic school and when I came here, I was deeply interested in religion. So I was deeply interested in
It is fascinating.
Yeah, so I went to, believe it or not, there was a period in my 20s where I went to every different Christian tradition. But I believe that Christ is the Son of God. This is, to me, he embodied everything.
I'd like to talk about how you decided that... I want to talk more about this, but we have to go for a break.
It's very important to me,
Yeah, it is. It's very important to understand religion in order to understand politics as well. And we have about a minute left. We're going to be here in the studio with Shiva Ayyadurai for the next hour and a half. And I'd like you to call in if you're interested, 860-464-9490, 860-464-9490. Dan Hunt, I have you on my mind, especially with some of the things Shiva just said. So you're welcome to call in. If you like the show, like me on Facebook, Lori Hopkins-Cavanagh. Follow me on Twitter at Lori on Liberty, and also Gmail me, LoriOnLiberty@gmail.com. That's LoriOnLiberty@gmail.com. I do want to say that it is a beautiful day out there. I'm sure you're enjoying it. And you might not have your phone handy, but hopefully we're going to get into this has been a very nice background conversation. We're going to get into some really hard-hitting politics, and you're not going to want to miss it. So don't go away. We'll be right back after the break.
Listening to Lori on Liberty on 94.9 News Now and stimulating talk. We'll be right back. Back to Lori on Liberty on 94.9 News Now and stimulating talk.
Welcome back to Lori on Liberty on 94.9 News Now. And I'm in the studio today with Shiva Ayyadurai, and he is running against Elizabeth Warren, one of my... I just cannot handle. I can't even watch her on the media. I don't know how you feel about her, but Massachusetts used to be a very, very liberal state, but I think Connecticut has surpassed it in terms of the progressive movement. We're going to get into policy in a moment, but I do want to just a little bit more background on you, Shiva. You have a book out now, and you can find it on Amazon. I want you all to go to Amazon and buy the book, All American Indian, This Fight is Your Fight. And you played that against Warren's This Fight is Our Fight.
Yeah, she had put out a book called This Fight is Our Fight, something like The Battle to Save the Middle Class. Mm-hmm. And I put this out in response to that. This says, This Fight is Your Fight, and the battle to save the middle class from the elites who think they know better. Mm-hmm. So Warren is a fake fighter, like she's a fake Indian, and fake many things. And I think, when we started saying it's a real Indian versus fake Indian, Lori, the reason I was trying to figure out why people
this was a little press stunt that you did that turned viral, and it was great. I have to say, I commend you.
It came right, when I announced on February 24th that the Bull Moose party in D.C. went viral, and it just came off my tongue. And I think the reason...
And this is Pocahontas claiming that she is Indian descent, and she's not.
So just to give the audience some background, Elizabeth Warren in 1995 wanted to get a job at Harvard. Problem, she's not qualified. So then she says that she's a Native American. Problem, she's not a Native American. Right? So she actually checked off that she's a Native American, which takes a lot of gumption to do that. And it's clear that there was a collusion between her and Harvard because they wanted to say they had a minority on her staff. So basically, she stepped in front of line and took another minority's actual seat because that was actually deserved for an actual person who's of Native American or minority descent. But it's a self-serving elitist, and
She's
is why
a con artist,
and this is why she believes others should cut in line, like illegal immigrants. So within her whole operating system is it's okay to break the rules for herself and others, that you don't have to follow rules. So that notion of a real Indian versus a fake Indian, it just so happens we're using the word Indian, but to what you earlier said was there's a whole set of career politicians who actually don't create jobs, they don't know how to fix anything, they don't actually add any value. So everything they do is fake. They create tiers, they create photographs, which we'll talk about. They'll create relationships that they have with this or that person. One of the guys in Massachusetts actually faked a handshake with President Trump, the most powerful person in the world.
And that was a Republican, wasn't it?
That was a Republican. We called him out. We hired forensics experts, but the local mainstream media won't pick this up because they're in collusion.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's what we have. These politicians are all fake. And the founders of this country never wanted politicians. They were blacksmiths, they were workers, they were
farmers,
architects, they were soldiers. They were not politicians. Senator is not a job title. There's no job description. That's a service thing you're supposed to go do, and you're supposed to go back to the farm and work. So senator is not a career.
Oh, let's go back to your Warren press stunt here, because what he did, you sent a genetic test to her office to prove that you're Indian.
Yeah, we live in the 21st century now, right?
Absolutely fantastic.
Where you can actually do DNA analysis. The Genome Project ended in 2003. We have amazing high throughput techniques for doing this. There are companies now who can do this within weeks. So I actually, on my own...
Was it 23andMe? What did you use?
Yeah, we sent 23andMe. We don't want to advertise people, but we sent a 23andMe test to her. I did it on Amazon. In fact, I gift wrapped it, and
nice.
and in the gift wrap I said, to thy own self be true, which is famous quote from Shakespeare.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And sent it to her, and a week later we found out she returned it. And so the returning of that gift, I tweeted out. I said, I'm deeply saddened that Senator Warren didn't accept my gift-wrapped gift to her, and that went viral on the internet. Fox News and Friends picked it up, and then I was on Stuart Varney as a follow-up to that.
It's fantastic, yeah.
Yeah, so the point is, we did that. It's not just a stunt, right? But it drives deep at this notion that people think that they can get away, that they can make such egregious claims and not have to fess up to it.
They can. They do.
Exactly.
Every day, and it's horrible. I think the American public is disgusted with it. And
meanwhile, they'll do fake news against people who actually start going after them, and that will receive mainstream media attention. So they play both sides.
It's amazing how corrupt the media is. I call it the local rag, but it doesn't matter if it's local or if it's national or worldwide. It's just the age of investigative reporters died probably in the 1970s.
It died around the 70s, 80s when you started seeing the consolidation of media.
Yeah.
The local reporter got destroyed. In New Jersey, in Newark, for example, at one time you had 25 small newspapers. Now you have one or two.
Right.
In fact, there's been consolidation of even local media.
No, the good thing is we have the internet and talking about the internet.
Local radio like you do.
Yeah.
So it gives options.
News talk radio is wonderful.
Right.
I mean, we're fortunate that during the Obama administration, many of their policies with the FCC have been overturned or they're going the opposite direction now under Trump because they were going to basically come in to any radio station, look at the files and determine who's been on, what you talked about. And this was all in the direction of hate speech. And this is one of the policy discussions I want to have with you. But let's talk about your career. So you're a scientist and an inventor because you've been credited with inventing email.
Yeah, so I've always loved science, creating and actually starting businesses as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I ran my own landscaping business when I was a 12, 14-year-old kid. Mm-hmm. I was always, tweaking around with collecting parts and making stuff. And I loved, I was also an athlete, but I loved science. I loved innovation. By the time I was 14, I so valued the opportunities in this country that I finished calculus by the time I was 14 years old, which is what was offered to the 12th graders. I finished it by 9th grade. So by the time I was 14, Lori, I didn't have any other math courses to take in high school. So I got very fortunate. In 1978, I got accepted to a special program at New York University where 40 students all across the United States were selected to learn software engineering, computer science, 7 programming languages. This was at New York University.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so I was very fortunate. I get accepted. My mom would drop me off at the PATH station in Newark, and I would take the train into Bleecker Street, right into Washington Park. So this is when I was 14. Most parents are afraid to send their kids down the street. So I used to go to New York by myself, arrived there at around 7 a.m., work until 8 p.m., and graduated top of the class. When I finished that, I got even more fortunate. My mom introduced me to a experimental physicist, Dr. Les Michelson, who in Newark, in the heart of Newark, New Jersey, at this medical school that's now known as Rutgers Medical School, in those days, he had set up a small computer network between 3 campuses, Newark, Piscataway, and New Brunswick. And he was doing scientific data processing. And he said, Shiva, don't drop out of high school. I'll give you a challenge. So my high school, again, amazing dedicated teachers, they changed the rules so this kid could take some humanities courses and go into the heart of Newark and work full time. So what did I do? I was given this challenge to convert the entire old office mail system. Remember, every secretary had an inbox, outbox folders. They'd write a memo,
and a
CC,
Rolodex.
BCC, the Rolodex, the address book, the trash bucket, that entire system. I converted to the electronic version. I called it email, a term never used in the English language, wrote 50,000 lines of code, and a few years later I was awarded the first U.S. copyright for email at a time when copyright was the only way to protect software.
That is so exciting.
Right.
I mean, that really is exciting that you did that. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, it was exciting on many levels because I was 14, but...
Do you ever get thanked? Do people come up to you and say...
Well, people actually say I want to kill you because of email.
But, did you also come up with spam?
Well, we did do spam back then, but the point was this occurred not in the military-industrial academic complex, not in the deep state. See, the deep state likes to take credit for all innovation. This occurred in Newark, New Jersey, in the ecosystem of loving parents, dedicated public school teachers, and a mentor. That's a triangle where innovation comes out of.
Absolutely.
That's the same triangle where Philo Farnsworth, a 14-year-old boy...
It wasn't by design. It wasn't by... You are not by design. The problem I have with progressives today is I think they can socially engineer everything, where we live, what we think, our school systems, Common Core standards of education. Like we're some kind of round peg that fits in a round hole and everything's going to be perfect, and it doesn't work like that.
It's an interesting term. So they try to factory farm food, genetic engineering, GMOs. We try to factory farm education. And we try to factory farm everything. And jobs. And jobs, so we're centralizing everything. When I invented that email system, it was not about, we didn't care about money. It was about the sheer thing of doing this. We were open. Thousands of people saw this Hewlett-Packard IBM.
How old were you when you did this?
I was 14. I was 14 years old. But see, that could
Shiva,
only occur in America. But you got to understand, you know who invented TV? It was a 14-year-old farm boy in Franklin, Idaho by the name of Philo Farnsworth. He went through the same journey. Loving parents, a dedicated school teacher, and he had a little bit of infrastructure. It shows that you don't need the government. You don't need a lot of money. It's about that right environment of mentors and good family and dedicated teachers. That's where great innovation comes from. We've manipulated this whole narrative to say you got to go to Silicon Valley, you got to go to MIT, and out of there is where you get great innovation. Not to say they don't innovate, but there's a lot of smart people in this country beyond the triangle of the military-industrial academic complex who thinks that they own the hegemony on innovation.
Yeah, but the politicians have decided that they own everything that is good. If it doesn't come from a political bill or law that gets passed, it doesn't exist. Right, in their minds, they really do.
Yeah, they're basically, what I look at it as, there's a military-industrial academic complex, a deep state. Then there are the politicians who are basically front-end car salesmen for that, and then there are the people. So think about it as three tiers. You have the real people who run this country or the world, and then you have these politicians.
Now, what do you think about the United Nations? Let's get down to the dirty. This has been your background is just unbelievable. You're a successful businessman, highly intelligent, capable, and you have an opportunity, and I think you can do it, to beat Elizabeth Warren.
I'm the only one who can defeat her. The issue is, will the establishment allow me to defeat her, or do they want her there because they serve their power-sharing purposes? So if you're thinking about the UN, think about when the UN was created, post-40s, right? It
was created in communism.
It was what was created
by a communist.
At the time it was created is when I believe the deep state actually starts to form in the United States.
Absolutely.
It's when Vannevar Bush, the president of MIT, starts Raytheon. Right? So this is when a very great history of science professor, David Noble, wrote a great book called Forces of Production. He pointed out the day that Vannevar Bush, the president of MIT, started Raytheon is when we started seeing public funds start being used to fund the military-industrial academic complex. Then you go to the 1961 when Eisenhower gives this very famous speech saying that beware of the military-industrial complex. And a few years later, Fulbright talked about the military-industrial academic complex. So between the 40s to the 60s is when this military-industrial complex forms. And the UN was a vehicle to do that. The UN was presented to people as those for brotherhood.
Trump has said that he would like to defund the UN. I would like to see the UN defunded. I would like to see the UN just buried because I think it
serves no purpose.
It serves a purpose for globalism.
Yeah, right.
And again, talking about the difference in parties, there is no difference between the Republicans and Democrats when it comes to globalism. And that is what you're talking about, the establishment elite.
I call it imperialism, globalism, et cetera. And that and what has occurred is that we don't really have, the false thing that they've set us up as liberal versus conservative, Democrat versus Republican. This is just a charade.
Absolutely.
They control both sides. What we really need to start looking at is, who are the people who want freedom and want to deconstruct,
liberty,
as Bannon said, the administrative state, and who are the
Absolutely.
people who want to support the state? That's really the fundamental issue here. The Second Amendment is probably God bless the Second Amendment, because if we don't have that, we're all screwed in many ways.
Yeah.
The founders of this country set up the Second Amendment so we could protect ourselves from the state. And the real issue comes in, are you for deconstructing the state, or do you support the state? That's where the rubber meets the road.
Well, you also have the problem with communism because you have, social democrat. I think that's a little bit of a passé identity because I think we're far beyond that. I think we have a problem with communism, global communism, and we have a problem with liberty-loving people, and that's nationalism now. Every country across the world, the globe, pretty much is starting to embrace that nationalist movement that is a movement in liberty. I mean, the name of the show is Lori on Liberty, specifically because liberty is the most important goal that we have as individuals. And you have this collective concept. And one of the things you said before is you switched the book to say from our to your.
Right.
It's the individual that matters in the pursuit of liberty. Sam from Westerly's on the line. Sam, welcome to the show. What do you think of Shiva?
Of Cuba?
Shiva.
Shiva. I got distracted. I heard the right word here a few minutes ago, and it reminded me, and you're talking about education and geniuses and going the right way. How about the Wright brothers and their sister? They were all homeschooled.
Yeah. Well, I think you bring up a good point. You see, when I was in 8th grade, our teacher, before the Department of Education destroyed it, he gave you the standard curriculum, but for the students who wanted to go faster, he was given power. We've completely disempowered teachers. But you're absolutely right.
Yes.
This whole notion, I learned more from my father, working with him. My father was an engineer, and he'd come on with amazing problems. He and I would solve like incredible chemical engineering problems until 2 a.m. That's where I learned.
The Wright brothers did with each other.
Exactly. So we have created this concept that you must go through this process and then you're quote unquote smart. You go to MIT and then you get to innovate. And having been an insider, I can tell you, I've met some of the. Frankly, but when I was a freshman, I realized there was a lot of professors at MIT who are not that smart. They got in there by essentially being robots and playing the game. And what we find is that we've created an environment right now that we have forced students to go down this educational process, and we burden them with student loans. So they get around with $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 loans. And who's making money on the loans are the big universities. So the student loan is not even a student loan. The money never hits a student's bank account. It goes right from the government, Sallie Mae, to the universities. That's why Elizabeth Warren is getting $350,000, $400,000, because there's no market forces on there. They've destroyed community colleges. They want to destroy all of homeschooling. But the idea is they don't want a competitive environment. They want a centralized power, big universities, big education, and you go down the list. So it's absolutely right. Most innovation, most intelligence occurs by people solving problems on their own, facing the frontier by themselves. And that was the fundamental spirit of our founders. Mm-hmm. It was not supposed to be centralized.
And the Wright brothers, what they were smart enough to do was to protect their copyright.
That's right.
And their patents.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, when you look at the Wright brothers, it was a time when people were understanding, like flight and Bernoulli's equation. If they didn't do it, someone else would have done it. But the point is that they did it in a very entrepreneurial environment.
And they were in hot competition with the head of the Smithsonian Institution.
Exactly. So, but I think the main point you bring up is that innovation, I always believe, can occur anytime, any place, by anybody. You don't need to be part of the elite. But what they've done is, just like genetically engineered food, they want a factory farm innovation. They want to centralize innovation, what they call innovation hubs. So then a few set of Wall Street guys, big Wall Street, can control innovation. So what you end up with, you never really solve any significant local problems. You keep solving centralization problems, which essentially serves the global elites. Mm-hmm. They're determining.
100 years ago, there was a guy who wanted to, effectively communize the farmers, or collectivize the farmers.
Yeah.
And look what it did for them.
Exactly. What's interesting? I just tweeted out today, about 35 years ago, two scientists discovered something called cold fusion. You may remember this. Remember the 80s?
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, Pons and Fleischmann, and they were vilified.
Yes.
When that research came to MIT, the news director of MIT, PhD Eugene Mallow, MIT scrambled to try to destroy it. And he got results showing that they actually replicated it, and then they showed it was accidentally shown that they replicated, but the actual thing, how they manipulated the results. Those two scientists got destroyed. The document that MIT created became the document the patent office used, saying cold fusion wouldn't work. Eugene Mallow left MIT basically on protest. And then a few years later, he wrote a book called From Fire from Ice, and then he started a nonprofit saying, look, there is something going on. Interesting enough, he was found dead in his apartment a few years later. What's interesting is now, in the last 5 years, 100 different labs, people independently have replicated cold fusion. And so
that is an update for me, because I was still left under the impression that it had been considered fake.
No, it's now they call it low-energy nuclear reactions, and it has been duplicated. And the point is, something is going on, but the elites, if innovation does not come out of their centers of power, they must try to destroy it, because they think they're the only people who know better. But the reality is, we know everyone knows better, and that's what Elizabeth Warren's about. She thinks she knows better, right? So Dodd-Frank, what is Dodd-Frank about? Gosh. It's the centralization of banking. It destroyed 1,200 community banks. Obamacare has...
Okay, wait. We're going way off the reservation here.
All right.
It's all your fault, Sam.
Yeah.
From Westerly. God bless you, sir. Thank you for calling in.
Thanks again.
He'll bring a historic moment in time to the show every time.
No problem.
Okay, what you brought up Dodd-Frank. This show started as Win It Real Estate. I'm a real estate broker. It's my second business. I used to own an advertising and PR firm. As a real estate broker, I also started out in broadcasting in college at UConn, and news when news was news. But what I found is that subjects like Dodd-Frank, they passed this law. The Republicans did fight against it for years. They passed the law, and it was a decision to, I think, put the small banking institutions completely out of business, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is going to lead me to something very important. This is, again, the UN and globalism. We are being pushed to a point where the United States is going to become a state of the United Nations. That's where we were, giving up our Second Amendment for the Small Arms Agreement for the United Nations. And Kerry signed that. Okay, the Congress overturned it. But will you protect the Second Amendment at all costs? Do you support reciprocity between states? For example, I always carry. If I'm leaving Connecticut going into Rhode Island, as soon as I cross that border, I'm 10 minutes away. I've violated the law. Do you support reciprocity between states and complete freedom in terms of...
So I have a very interesting position. First of all, to be very clear, I think the Second Amendment, without the Second Amendment, the Constitution has no teeth, right? It's just a document. The Second Amendment is what gives teeth to the document. And if you fundamentally go at it, the founders of this country, there's also another institution that's important to this, Lori, and I want to mention this. The founders of this country wanted to make sure that we could protect ourselves from our own government. That's why they put the Second Amendment in place. So without the Second Amendment, there is no America. You can forget it, number one. The other thing that we also want to remember, there's another institution that the founders wanted, which we forget was called the Postal Service. You know, let me tell you, that was created so I could send you a letter and no one would interfere with that. Think about this. And the Office of Inspector General was set up that if anyone intervened with that letter, that there was a 20-year sentence.
It's a felony.
Sentence.
Yeah.
It's a felony. Now, this is important. So the Postal Service was in many ways a very powerful communications network, and by the way, up until the 70s, nearly 60% of the communication through the postal system was political communication. Very vibrant communication, okay? Now, what happens with email? As the inventor of email, I can tell you I was appalled when, quote-unquote, free email comes when the web took off. Because what it did was most people didn't read the privacy documents when they signed up for their free Gmail, free Hotmail. It basically says these large corporations own your email. They own your email. So if you believe the pen is mightier than the sword, yes, we need the sword, which is the Second Amendment, but something much more insidious has taken place. Google, a few large email providers, and the telcos all own our email right now. And no one discusses this. I would argue that every communication being watched, tapped, understood, known is as equally dangerous to the fact that people want to attack the Second Amendment. Because
I believe the First Amendment is as important as the Second Amendment, personally. I know you can't have the First Amendment without the Second Amendment, but at the same time, you can't have the Second Amendment unless you have the First Amendment also.
Right, but I'm saying there have been significant attacks been made with electronic media to our communication. So getting back to the Second Amendment, yes, I definitely support reciprocity.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, because it doesn't make sense. You have to go do all this. If you have a carrying license, it should be supported, across state lines. That's my opinion.
Well, the Second Amendment guarantees my right, no matter where I am in the United States.
It's a federal, it's a national issue. And it closely, I think, aligns with what the founders really wanted. When they looked at strong defense where we protected our borders, and the idea of the founders, from everything I've understood, was there wasn't also supposed to be standing armies or standing police force. It was supposed to be popular militias, which means each one of us was supposed to participate in the protection of our local communities. And in many ways, we've given a little bit of that up. The founders are always concerned once you had standing armies, because that means the state could oppress the people internally. So the Second Amendment, I believe it should be extended where all of us actually participate in our local police force, because I think that extends us and makes us much more.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. I think we were supposed to be rotating, and all of us were supposed to be armed, trained in protecting ourselves, and also supposed to participate, because that made us a much more vibrant populace.
I have so many questions to ask you. I just your wealth of knowledge, and also your perspective is quite unique. Dan is on the line, but we're not going to take the call right now. Dan, you want to call back after the break because we only have 2 minutes, and I'd love to get your perspective. We have in the studio Shiva Ayyadurai, and he is running against Elizabeth Warren in Massachusetts, and I pray that this wonderfully talented and intelligent man is able to defeat the establishment and the two-party rule, and that's what Dan is going to talk about. Dan is going to talk about, I know him like the back of my hand right now, well, probably not that well, but Dan, I know you're going to talk about there is no difference between the two parties, and Shiva will agree with that. You're listening to Lori on Liberty. I'm Lori Hopkins-Cavanagh on 94.9 News Now and Stimulating Talk. If you like the show, listen every Sunday from 1 to 3 p.m. And also, we have a Gmail account. Like as Shiva just said, it's probably owned by some Gmail. It's Google owns everything I say these days, I guess. But send me an email, LoriOnLiberty@gmail.com, LoriOnLiberty@gmail.com. Friend me on Facebook, Lori Hopkins-Cavanagh, and on Twitter at Lori on Liberty. Don't go away. We have a few seconds left, and I just want to say thanks to Chris every single show because he runs the board here and he does such a fantastic job. I really appreciate the work that he does. And I'm going to ask Shiva a bunch of policy questions, but first we're going to take the call from Dan when we get back from the break. So don't go away.
Back to Lori on Liberty on 94.9 News Now and Stimulating Talk.
Welcome back to Lori on Liberty. I'm going to try to steer the conversation into quick snippets of policy because there's not enough time to cover all of the knowledge that is coming out of Shiva's mouth right now. And Shiva is running against U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren. And we just got a phone call from a Connecticut resident saying that she absolutely thinks he's fantastic. And if you listen to Elizabeth Warren for more than 2 minutes, your head hurts. I mean, I don't mean to say she's an idiot. That's a really mean thing to say about another human being. But my God, I don't know where her synapses working in her brain. That's what I wonder. And now we have a gentleman who is running, who understands the Constitution, who understands liberty. And the meaning of liberty are uniquely American liberties. No other country on earth has what we have, and it's being taken away from us. And it's not the collective that is going to save this country. It's the individual. The individual is so important, and that's what our Constitution was based around. Individual, unalienable rights, not the government. So I was just talking to Shiva, and we were talking about the email that he patented and created. And I asked him, during the Obama administration, they were trying to give away the internet to the United Nations. And the United States is the inventor of the internet through NASA. But now I'm wondering if that's even true. Maybe it was invented by a homeschooler who just had his concept stolen from him. Who knows? But the internet is critical. And I want to just briefly have Shiva talk about what he just told me briefly. But this is the difference between a politician coming up with just propaganda to make everyone feel good nonsense, like you didn't build that, some talking point, and an actual thinking, experienced, intelligent person that we send to Washington, D.C. to solve problems. We were talking, Shiva, about the internet, and you said that the problem is that everything is being controlled by a few corporations. They own our email. They own the email. And that mail should be owned by the people. That's how the U.S. Postal Service was set up, to serve the people. And you said to me that we could have our own internet. Communities could have their own internet.
Yeah, so let me talk. So what so first of all, the military-industrial complex likes to assume they were the inventors of the internet. False. Companies like Honeywell, Western Union actually built protocols. Let me just keep it simple. When you look at the internet, it's a big network. What happened in the 70s was the military-industrial complex, the deep state, created one protocol, which means one method of running the internet, one standard. The reason they did that was that they could control communications. What we should have had and should have is multiple internets, which means a community group of people, we could create our own internet and we could have our own protocols. That's the way you protect the people. So just keep that in mind.
That is an incredible revelation for me today.
Right. So when we say we have the internet and it's free, it's all controlled through one standard. And standardization helps those in centralization of power.
You know, I was so afraid that our communication will be shut down by the government when Obama was president. He's bringing in the United Nations to police our cities.
Well, so if you look at what happened remember when the students were protesting in Tahrir Square in Egypt, when they were protesting, they were using social media, et cetera. When working people came out to protest, overnight Mubarak called Vodafone and he shut everything down.
He shut everything down.
So everyone should be aware that the internet, first of all, is standardized, and also there's 3 or 4 telecommunications companies which actually own the pipe, the actual fiber that runs the internet. So we don't have free communications. Now, transition that to what the founders of this country wanted. When they set up the Postal Service, the notion of it was that I could communicate with Lori. I could send Lori a letter. No one would interfere with it. And if someone did, there would be a 20-year felony for that. And
fascinating.
So we've taken that away. And the Postal Service has been gutted. Now, the good news is, this is why I think it's important to have scientists and innovators and people who actually work for a living, is there are amazing technologies like WiMAX, other technologies which would allow us as a public to create our own internet independent of any major telco. It's called a mesh network. And on that, we could run our own protocols, which would be independent of the government. It's essentially community networks.
Shiva, that is just unbelievable. So if you went down to Washington, D.C., if Massachusetts, I hope your voice is heard in Massachusetts. And if you go down to Washington, D.C., you want to work on these types of projects.
Oh, yeah. I think we should completely enable the concept of free, truly free. By the way, when you sign up for your free email, most people don't have a chance to read that 60, 90-page 8-point font agreements, which basically says that Google owns your email. Hotmail owns your email. This is fundamental, just as the Second Amendment is fundamental, is that we've given up our freedom for quote-unquote free email. And we need to take that back. Yeah, our freedom has been given up for quote-unquote free email.
Is on the line. Dan, what do you think of Shiva?
Interesting discussions, and I want to comment on at least one of them.
Go ahead.
Well, you were talking before the break about national reciprocity. Whenever, at least this is what people should consider, whenever the federal government acts upon something, it's a regulation of something.
Yeah.
So then the question is that action either comply with or violate the U.S. Constitution? Now, the Second Amendment specifically prohibits the federal government from regulating arms in any way because it's an unalienable right. So even this national reciprocity law is unconstitutional because it empowers the federal government to regulate an unalienable right, which is in violation of the Second Amendment. And as an unalienable right, they all extend down to state constitutions as well. For example, in the Connecticut Constitution, Article 1, Section 15 specifically states, in even more blunt terms than the Second Amendment, that every citizen has the right to bear arms in defense of himself and the state. So if we're going to do this constitutionally, there can be no gun laws either on the state or federal level because they're all unconstitutional. And therefore, as soon as the act occurred, they were null and void. So constitutionally, there are no laws for gun laws because the unalienable right cannot be subject to regulation and cannot be subject to license and fees. And there are court cases that reaffirm that premise, and I don't have them in front of me because I'm not at home, but there are court cases to that effect.
Hey, Dan, but don't you think that the reciprocity bill would be restoring the Second Amendment to what its true meaning is, and that is that it trumps the state constitution, so states can't regulate Second Amendment, the right to bear arms also.
But keep in mind what the purpose of the Bill of Rights was. They're saying that all those rights within the Bill of Rights and those that are not expressly enumerated to the federal government are reserved to the states or to the people per Amendment 10.
No, the Second Amendment is federal.
Well, I think what Dan's saying is something very...
Let me finish my thought here.
Yeah.
But an unalienable right is premised on a law that's created by God. And no positive law, meaning a law created by man, can be superseded by God's law. So if we're going to hold to that principle, then the federal government, being a positive law, cannot supersede God's law and regulate it through national reciprocity.
Mm.
I think what Dan's saying is a very important point. Now, there are certain things which are inalienable rights. So once you start regulating those, you start now stepping into a very interesting swamp, which those in power actually want you to do, because now they can start regulating an inalienable right.
So
I think that's what you're saying, right, Dan?
Because if you look at the founding fathers believed in the concept of unalienable rights by God, which is God's law, and you can't regulate. If we're going to go down that path, you can't regulate God's law by man's law, which is a positive law.
Yeah, the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are unalienable and cannot be granted or rescinded by man. Right.
So all these laws in the past have been created by the state of Connecticut or any other state. They are all unconstitutional, and because of that, they were null and void as soon as they occurred. That's the premise upon which people have to uphold the U.S. Constitution. People, unfortunately, assume that because government acts upon something by default, it makes it constitutional, and nothing could be further from the truth.
Well, Dan, you know what? We need that court system, the people's court. Not
the common law.
Yeah, common law.
That never went away. It's just that the people don't realize that it was usurped by civil law, which doesn't empower the people to consider all matters of law and fact under a jury. Now you have the government running the jury, which is not a jury of your peers.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for calling in.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Dan.
Take care, Dan.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
He's my constitutional expert that calls in from Manchester. Incredible guy.
Point. Yeah.
And these are all open to discussion, but I think he reminds everyone that we are giving up our powers. Mm-hmm. We are willingly just laying our liberty on the line and giving up the powers because we don't stand up and fight for them any longer. I think that's changing today. And sending the right people down to Washington, D.C. is extremely important. And Warren, she is just part of the problem. She would like to see us disarmed. She believes in hate speech, and those are some of the things I want to get into. Education is very important. We have the Federal Department of Education. Then we have what I call a shadow government, and it runs alongside many of these departments. Maybe it's the deep state. Maybe that's what it's the same, one and the same. But we have over 5,000 employees at the Department of Education. They have militarized the Department of Education in Washington, D.C. You just can't walk in there. It is militarized. They have actually stockholds of ammunition and guns. The government has militarized itself against the people, in essence. And no one's talking about that today. But education has become a UN agenda. And what they're teaching, I have 2 teenagers. One just turned 18. She's going to UConn next year. My son is homeschooled. I took him out of school because he's far too intelligent to sit in a classroom all day and go through the normal day of a teenager, which I think is torture to a teenager. He needs to let his mind go and his creativity go, and they stop you from doing that in school. But what I was shocked at was the brochure when I switched my kid's school that said, you are a global citizen. And the adoption of the Common Core and workforce education programs. You were just talking about the fact that there's 5 jobs in Massachusetts, you said?
For every 17 skilled job
17
openings,
skilled.
only one person is skilled to take on that job.
Okay, so how do you feel about workforce education the way it's set up now, where they take a kid in kindergarten and test him and test him and test him and test him? He gets into third grade, tested. They're determining which schools the government wants to determine through data mining what schools that child will go to, what that child will be trained to do in the future, what job that child will be holding in the global, as a global citizen. To me, that is as creepy as you can get, and it is the opposite of what I think education is.
Yeah, it's a top-down model, right? So if you go again back to the core, the difference between the founders and these career politicians, or the people who've usurped freedom, is they want to centralize power. So the centralization of power is to treat human beings as a commodity that you organize, you engineer, and you make into some state product, right? This is what. So it's very different than it's a state bureaucracy. It's like sort of the state capitalism, crony capitalism model that was developed in the Soviet Union. It's basically the Sovietization of everything. So in that model, you're trying to track everything, gear everything over some overarching concept that a few people know what's better for everyone else.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's a
But we're set up like that now. As a senator, what can you do for us?
I think the first thing that you need to do is basically you need to go after breaking that down. So, for example, when it comes to education, we need to go back to decentralizing it.
What about Bill Gates Foundation? He is on the UN, in the UN, on the world stage.
But the Gates Foundation is pretty insidious what they're really up to. You know, they have no interest in really. They have very self-serving interests what they're doing in Africa. If you want to go to malaria, this is all about a self-serving interest for themselves to own lots of land for themselves and for their elites who they represent. It has nothing to do.
Well, Common Core was set up so that they could sell more computers and data mine people.
Right. I can get into Bill Gates, but getting back to the core.
Have you met Bill Gates?
I've met him once, long time ago. He came to an MIT event, and you have to understand.
He's the epitome of the global elite that you're talking about, right?
He's the epitome of the global elite. You know, he didn't actually create the DOS operating system. You know, he's an example of the elite. You know, he's a Harvard dropout, right? That's okay, and he gets a lot of fame around that. But a kid from Newark, New Jersey, or a kid from Franklin, Idaho, inventors of email and TV, are sort of not really as well known. But Bill Gates is, because if you look at his background, his father was part of the elite. His mother was part of, I believe, United Way. He had actually bought the DOS operating system from another kid who had actually made it, and then he marketed it to IBM. So he didn't really invent anything.
He was a salesman.
He was a salesman. So, but getting back to the core of education, if you really look at where education really occurs, it occurs one-on-one. You know, Socrates, if you look at the old Socratic method, it was one-on-one. You know, you actually looked at real problems and you actually participated in a one-on-one model. Education was always local between a teacher and a student, and the teacher was empowered in many ways to bring that student along. What we've done is, with this Department of Education and the centralization, we've destroyed that whole concept of real learning. So what we, you know,
Would you be in favor of going to Washington, D.C. and supporting President Trump and saying that we don't need a Department of Education and abolishing that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm of the
Make it an agency.
It should be an agency. I mean, if you look at from the 70s when the Department of Education really came, you know, I was fortunate in the mid 70s to grow up in some ways at the best of American education. School teachers were empowered. They could do stuff. They could change rules. That teacher who fought with the administration when I was in Livingston, so this 14-year-old kid to do an independent study in Newark, is where email came out of. It would not have come out of that.
Yeah, I see my son and his creative mind, and he's talking about a clock in space, and he's talking about different concepts of building and engineering that he's not getting in school. They teach a certain segment of knowledge that doesn't lead to any kind of ingenuity or I just don't see the creativity in the school system.
So Lori, one of the advantages we have.
I have a question from a caller.
Sure.
And I want to make sure we cover this before we get off the air.
Yeah. So
do you need donations? I heard you're rich. Are you rich?
Oh, I'm funding most of my own campaign. We raised close to, it's public.
You're a wealthy man, though.
Yeah. We're funding, we have our own building in Cambridge. I have technology that I've built. In fact, I built for all of our email stuff.
Do you make money from your patent on the email?
No, because, here's a problem. See, the Washington career politicians I made money other ways, but in 1978, the politicians in Washington thought software was sheet music. So in 1980, they only allowed copyright to protect. It was only in 1994 did the Federal Court of Appeals allow patent protection. So I
missed it.
But I did the best I could do at that time. At that time, had patents been allowed, then I'd be making a penny off every email. But regardless,
you'd be living on an island somewhere with.
Well, I don't think I'd ever live off an island. I enjoy society.
You
too
like
much
people too much.
Yeah, I like to.
But the fact is, when someone asks how can I donate, I have to tell you that.
We need lots of money, by the way. You can go to ShivaForSenate.com because Elizabeth Warren has a war chest of $10 million.
Absolutely.
But we're going to do it at a fraction of what she does because most of the money that these politicians in some ways steal from everyday people through donations is going to political consultants, and it's going a lot of it to TV advertising. That's where if you look at their P&L statement, we're running our campaign like we would run a very tight entrepreneurial endeavor. The message is the key. The people that are attracted to our campaign.
Oh, but you've got to do some television because she is perfect for television.
But what I'm saying is you have to do it on a regular basis, and there's many other modes.
Oh, there's so many other methods.
There's many other vehicles to do that. But most of the money, believe it or not, is going to a small set of political consultants who really have no real loyalty. They just jump from one bed to another.
I know. Believe me, running for Congress, it was an eye-opener.
Yeah.
And trying to run a campaign like a business is another eye-opener.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, when you donate to Shiva, and it's SHIVA for Senate.
For the number 4.
The number 4.
Senate.com.
Senate.com. When you give your $10, $50, $75, whatever it is, it helps him show that he's not just supported by big business or by big donors, special interests. We don't want our politicians owned by special interests. We want the small people donating and owning the politicians. That's a big difference. And
exactly. And what's interesting is we have gotten so much, good media by our own organic movement. We didn't get onto Fox News or Fox and Friends by having a high-paid consultant who called them.
I'm a business person
we
too.
We did it organically.
We know how to do things for a much less cost.
Right.
And that's the innovation of a business person, and that's what we need in Washington, D.C., in Massachusetts especially.
One of the things we want to do with our campaign is we're finding out that most people, when they run, they have to beg to many of the state GOPs even to get basic infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things we want to do is, as a part of this campaign, we're going to give a lot of the technology we've created that I own, that I invented, to politicians who want to run. We want to make it open architecture so anyone can have access to some basic technology, basic tools, because that levels a playing field.
Well, there's some people I don't want elected, even if they are have an R after their name or a D after their name, because they are voting one and the same, and that's the problem. Okay, taxes. You and I both know that the middle class has been destroyed unequitably by the fact that they cannot take advantage of the deductions of the wealthy, for example. Our tax system is a burden, and it is far too complex. And Trump wants tax reform in Washington, D.C. The Democrats are nothing but obstructionists. What do you think that we could do in the federal tax system?
Well, first of all, right now, there's the personal taxes, right, people, and then there's the small business taxes. We have close to 10 million small businesses in this country. They're being completely burned by taxes.
Declining.
The C Corp tax rate is 30%. And if you're an owner of a C corporation, where you have to, most investors, they want a C Corp to raise money, you not only get taxed at the corporate level, then you also get double tax on what you do. So because of that, people start doing all these wacky things.
So what's your recommendation?
Well, I think we need to make it very, very simple. I think it should just be a flat tax, and we should also look at this fair tax concept at the individual level for consumption tax. It's not a bad model, right? Because then you lower the tax rate significantly at the individual.
There's arguments on that. We should talk about that when we get back.
But I'm saying it's clear that everyone needs lower taxes. Elizabeth Warren actually wants to have a 105% tax rate for corporations. And meanwhile, she works at an institution, Harvard, who pays no taxes. And they have close to a $40 billion endowment. She probably gets free health care. She gets
privileged nonprofits.
Yeah, exactly.
It's got to go away.
Exactly.
That's so. That is the unfair part of this.
And the United Nations and a lot of these people support these large NGOs, which 80% they skim off to run their own operations. So we're talking about a lot of tax revenue being lost from these nonprofits who pay no taxes.
And they are for-profits.
Exactly.
Well, look at the Clinton Foundation.
Exactly.
Oh, my God. We have to take a break. I'm here in the studio for another half hour only. This goes by so fast. And Shiva was nice enough to join us today on 94.9 News Now and Stimulating Talk. He's running against Senator Warren. And if you want to visit his website, it's Shiva, the numeral 4, Senate.com. Don't go away. We'll be right back after the break.
You're listening to Lori on Liberty on 94.9 News Now and Stimulating Talk. We'll be right back. Back to Lori on Liberty on 94.9 News Now and Stimulating Talk.
A fascinating conversation with Shiva Ayyadurai, who is running against U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren in 2018. And he's self-funding, but he is looking for campaign contributions. It's very important to any politician to show that we the people support them. That's a big deal. And I think that this man is in the perfect position to beat Elizabeth Warren, and we're getting a good idea of his knowledge of the Constitution and our unalienable rights, our liberties, how he feels about education, what kind of innovative changes he could bring to Washington, D.C. as a businessman, as a scientist, as an inventor. And I'm just blown away by this, but I'd like to get into a problem that we're facing as a country, where we look about traditional American family, traditional belief in the sanctity of life, the traditional belief that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, and now we have all this gender fluidity garbage that is being taught in schools and public schools, being forced down our throats, that defies science. But he's telling me, Shiva's telling me, that it really doesn't defy science, that there's some legitimate reason why we see a large number of gender issues in our society today. Shiva, you were just telling me that could be a chemical reaction.
Well, look, so I have a couple of points I want to make on this. Sexuality may be a spectrum, okay? Mm-hmm. Which that's what the argument is, right? Mm-hmm. It's a spectrum of many different flavors. Mm-hmm. Be that so. Mm-hmm. But my problem is I think that's a very personal thing, what people want to do in their personal lives, mm-hmm. and it shouldn't mm-hmm. be adjudicated. It shouldn't be enforced on us, because something about that to me never felt right, mm-hmm. that it should be enforced on us at the educational level, at all these different levels. Now, the other interesting thing is, I have a PhD in biological engineering, mm-hmm. and this is going to be a little bit controversial, but it is the reality of this. A great guy out in Berkeley, which is a very liberal mm-hmm. institution, Tyrone mm-hmm. Hayes, several years ago, he was funded by Syngenta, if I think that's a company, mm-hmm. to look at the effects of atrazine, mm-hmm. which is one of the very powerful restricted use pesticide that's sprayed on golf courses. It's sprayed on school fields, to keep weeds out, etc. Mm-hmm. Syngenta gave Hayes money to understand the deleterious effects of atrazine. They were mm-hmm. hoping he would just pay to play. Mm-hmm. A lot of these academics do. He found out that atrazine, he did it first in amphibians, was actually changing gender. So atrazine, again, is a chemical, very powerful pesticide. It was changing the sex of frogs. He went on to show that in also, I believe, mammals now. So this has become very controversial.
They fired him, I imagine?
Well, Syngenta came after him. Mm-hmm. He fought back, and people can look him up. But the reality is, let's say there is a spectrum of sexuality. But let us say that these large chemical companies are actually destroying our natural environment to such an extent that distribution, which may occur at some level in nature, is being completely perturbed, that we may have higher gender changes taking place. Now, wouldn't it be convenient to try to not address that issue and try to say, let's all make this just, kumbaya, everything's acceptable? Because maybe what's going on is we're actually affecting gender at a very fundamental level because of these pesticides. And I'm not speaking conspiracy theory, because this research was published in Nature, one of the most eminent science magazines.
And it's been known for a while, because my doctor, who passed away from lung cancer, unfortunately, Dr. Nesbitt, she was an amazing woman, but she told me that they were finding chemicals in breast tissue. They're finding chemicals within our body, so we're absorbing them.
Hundreds of chemicals in human breast milk for women. And this has been documented multiple times. The amount of pesticides that we put into our environment. Again, this has come from, again, the centralization of factory farming. We used to have local farms. We ship apples, 1,000 miles away.
We send chickens to China to be prepared.
Exactly.
Thank you, Obama.
This was not the idea, again, of how things are supposed to be. It's supposed to be local farms, local distribution, et cetera. So what we have now is we're using factory farming, companies like Monsanto, genetically engineered foods, and this is basically, and by the way, Elizabeth Warren, this is very important for any liberal listening to this, supported the Monsanto Protection Act, which allows the executive department to overrule a federal judge if a federal judge wants to impose an injunction on any of these substances that are produced by these chemical companies. And Elizabeth Warren supported the Monsanto Protection Act. And in fact, most of these career politicians get paid off by Monsanto. So what we have now is a complete poisoning of America. I just finished a movie with Pierce Brosnan, who supported, and his wife, who live on the island of Kauai. Half of the island of Kauai has been used as a testing ground, starting with Agent Orange, which has destroyed most of the people, in terms of all sorts of health issues have come up.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the issue, and it's called poisoning paradise. I'm the main scientist who discusses this. But this is not a left or right issue. It's not a Democrat or liberal issue. This is an issue with the centralization of farming. We are destroying the food system. And if the food system is affecting gender, wouldn't it be very convenient to not address that issue, but try to make it a blasé issue that we should all support this, so we don't really address the issue?
When are you going to debate Warren? You have to be chosen by the Republican Party in the primary.
Chosen by the Republican Party.
So you're going to have a primary in May of, when is it?
Well,
May?
It's in April. And
April.
So what they do is, many people think we have fair elections in this country. What we have, I have to, first of all, I'm the first declared candidate.
You could ask her to debate now. There's nothing stopping you.
Yeah. So, since I'm on the phone, Elizabeth Warren, I challenge you to debate me on any issue that you wish to debate me on, any place you want, and I will take you head on head.
Oh my God, you're gonna eat her up and spit her out.
Yeah. So the issue is, do the rhinos, do the establishment career politicians in Massachusetts want Shiva Ayyadurai, who can defeat Elizabeth Warren, to do that, or are they in collusion with her? And we've started bringing this up. And my opinion is they're in collusion with her because they want to maintain a power-sharing agreement. What's happening is the establishment politicians, you can call them never-Trumpers, fake Trumpers, are all consolidating. So there's no Republican Democrat anymore. What you have is people who want to preserve the establishment and the state, and those people who want to fight for freedom, fight for truth, fight for real health, real jobs, real health, real education. These people want to maintain power. And that's why in Massachusetts, for every 17 skilled job openings, you only have one person, because there's no incentive to create people who can be in the 21st century anymore. So what we have is we've created educated, in some ways, a lot of students are getting educated, and they're living in their parents' basement right now.
Well, they're being educated, indoctrinated. Not educated.
Well, not only educated, but they have a huge student loan burden. And one of the big things, the next big bubble is going to be a $1.3 trillion student loan bubble. And that's the next thing that's going to burst.
Right there,
because you have all these students who cannot afford to survive. They can't afford housing. So, and when their time comes up to pay back their student loans, they're not going to be able to pay it up.
You could do a whole show on that. I just want to tell you that in Minnesota right now, they are passing out this toolkit for ensuring safe and supportive schools for transgender and gender nonconforming students. And this was adopted in this past July. And I was reading through it, and it's just shocking. I mean, it basically says that gender is an individual's innate sense of who they are. They just get rid of science, but they're starting this at a very, very young age, actually talking about at a kindergarten level, femininity in boys, masculinity in girls, and also sexual orientation. I mean, I think this is for a parent to decide and not for a school system to incorporate into their curriculum. I mean,
think it's completely ridiculous. Look.
But it's happening.
Yeah, it's happening, and this is a way of social engineering people. Look,
what can you do to stop it? What can we do with the Department of Education? Well, how can we change this?
Well, I think the Department of Education should become a small agency. We don't need 5,000 people running it. I'm not sure how much money they're spending, but it's unnecessary.
And then we have Bill Gates and the shadow government behind them getting all kinds of money for computer data mining. And they are doing that to our children.
Yeah. So I think we need to go back to the core principles, which is that, education is something that should,
local.
It should be local. It should be determined by parents. You have to give parents and teachers, empower them. The unions have way too much power. The government has way too much power.
Teachers union the most.
Yeah, but teachers should be empowered because they're the ones who went through the education.
Are you going to pursue the unions in Massachusetts? Are you going to go talk to them?
Well,
Did you see they have like an 18-page questionnaire? They want to know how communist you are.
Yeah. So here's my view on unions. Right. There was a time in American history when working people were being mistreated. They were trying to organize, and the big factory bosses used to beat the hell out of them, right? So that's when they tried to organize. That was in the 20s and 30s. So there was a righteous movement to protect the rights of workers.
The safety and health of workers.
The safety and the health of workers. And some of those things are necessary, but that has been consolidated into these very, very large unions, which basically have disempowered their worker. They're doing to the teachers union, to the everyday Teamster, what the state used to do to them, or what the bosses used to do to them. So in some ways, they've given up their power back to the unions. And the issue is, in education, teachers need to be empowered. So if they want to teach certain core knowledge, they can, and they can make judgments. Now, wealthy people get this already, right? If you go to these wealthy charter schools, the teacher gets to have the kids who are slow, they get a different curriculum. The kids who are smarter get a faster curriculum. But why is that denied to everyone? So the school choice concept should be given to everyone. Wealthy people are actually getting quote-unquote choice, but they're denying it to everyone
I believe in the voucher system, and I've had a lot of people argue with me against that, but I'm also against any kind of Department of Education other than an agency. I want to talk about, let's see here, in the sanctity of life. This is very important to me. I could not believe how many politicians, people running for political office that can't handle this subject matter properly. I'm a pro-life person. I do believe that there are options for women for a certain window where they can address this. But conception, life begins at conception. There's no science. It is a scientific fact.
Well, here's the deal.
We have so many people in the GOP, so many liberals in the GOP that are proud to have Planned Parenthood endorse them now. Tell me that you'd like to see Planned Parenthood defunded and that you do not believe in Planned Parenthood.
I don't believe that the federal government, should be supporting this. As a biologist, when you look at the formation at conception, an epithelial literally forms around the embryo. The epithelium is like your skin. So it is another being.
Uniquely genetic human being.
It's a uniquely separate thing. So when people are making these decisions, it's not my life. There's two lives
My
here.
body, yeah.
There's two lives actually here, and it's undeniable. So that's just a biological fact. And if people want to argue that, they're going to have problems with that. And in fact, hundreds of papers have come out validating that. And the federal funding of this, I think, also makes no sense because it's against the Constitution in many ways. It should, if anything, it should be a personal decision, but people need to understand that decision that they're making is two lives are being involved here. They are.
Well, does the baby have rights?
Well, my view, the baby does have rights, and there's really two people's lives here that's involved. It's not just one person's. I think the whole assumption there is it's just pro-choice.
No, that's what Planned Parenthood wants people to believe.
Exactly. But,
But the thing with Planned Parenthood, you take this organization, and I hope you address this clearly, because I think Republicans or conservatives have a hard time saying, how am I going to get elected if I come out and I'm pro-life? Well, Planned Parenthood also covers up incest. It covers up rape. It covers up the victimization of young girls. And that is a fact. And I know that's a fact personally. So I would say, why are our tax dollars going to support an entity that is actually a political force to be reckoned with, that is violating a lot of election laws on a regular basis? I see it all the time, yet nobody goes after them. And abortion's only one part of this. They are facilitating human trafficking, because if they can get these young girls into Planned Parenthood, no questions asked, then they're actually servicing
very good point,
some
Lori.
horrible people.
It's horrible.
And it's the truth, though.
Right. I mean, I think one of the big things is when you look at this pro-life, pro-choice thing, I think we should also look at what pro-life means at the larger levels. One is this issue. The other issue is you get to the health issues, right?
Absolutely.
We should also consider the other things we're doing against life.
Absolutely,
right?
Including Obamacare.
Including Obamacare.
Which was specifically designed to ration health care.
What's
it
not
is
even
government
healthcare,
rationing of health care.
What's not even health care, it's health insurance.
Health insurance.
Right, so what we've done is, in the 70s, I could go to my doctor if I had some thorn in my, whatever, something happened, and you paid $15, $20. Now you go to your doctor and you pay whatever the copay of $30 to $50, depending on what plan you're on. And you also have this other thing called insurance. And the bottom line is this entire healthcare model has nothing to do with health. It's about knives and drugs, medicine. Meaning
it's about money.
It's about money. It's about invasive procedures and giving drugs. The average 82-year-old in the United States is on 12 different drugs right now. And the drug
my
interaction.
father-in-law.
Right. So what we've done is, starting in the 70s, we allowed health insurance companies and pharma companies to start dictating policy. And the epitome of that was Romney Care, which is the same as Obamacare. Right, Romney Care equals Obamacare. What we now have is we've made big insurance companies. There's just a great article that came out the end of last year saying insurance companies have had record profits. Because what we've done is we've delivered them free customers. They don't have to compete, they get customers.
So you're against the individual mandate?
I'm against the individual, but more importantly, I think I don't think Obamacare should be completely repealed. We should talk about what is health care. How do you get health? Well, if you look at the numbers, we went from 57% of the doctors less than 10 years ago were independent doctors. Now only 32% are independent. So we've destroyed the local community doctor.
And that destroys the continuity of healthcare.
Not only does it destroy the continuity of healthcare, but we should have, we have 800,000 doctors in the United States. We should have, I believe, 1.6 million, 2 million doctors, where you need to eliminate the 4-year requirement to go to undergraduate, to go into medical school. We need to completely eliminate that. Other countries do it right after college, right after high school. You should be able to do a 5-year program.
Makes a lot of sense.
So now you have more retail locations, which means more doctors. What we've done is the health insurance companies now control the doctors.
And some of the most experienced doctors have closed their doors because they cannot run an individual practice any longer with all of the reporting procedures that have to be done.
Not only that, some quote-unquote nerd who's doing data mining is telling that doctor what procedure they should do because they found some probability. For example, I talked to an anesthesiologist. She said that I have to give 3 shots of a painkiller before I do certain type of spinal surgery when I know and I'm looking at the patient they don't need it because someone's dictating that as protocol.
I've run across it. We are fortunate to understand the difference between health care now, today, under Obamacare and before. My son has a small bowel, what is it called? Bacterial overgrowth. The test for this is 4 hours of breathing into a little plastic, bag. 4 hours of breathing into a little plastic bag. But he had to go through an upper and lower GI. He had to go through all these different procedures because the insurance companies want it done this way, when he could have had it done, and a lot of people are suffering inexpensively with a antibiotic, and you're done. That cures you. It's upside down. It's dangerous what they're doing.
What's happened is health insurance companies, big insurance, which is where all these guys get funded from. You know, you look at Schumer's money, where he got money from HMOs. So these guys are getting funded by big insurance companies. Big insurance is controlling. Doctors have become employees of big insurance.
I know, it's horrible.
We've destroyed. And look, 36 million people in the United States now practice yoga. The explosive growth of alternative medicines because people are recognizing these other things work. Massage works for moving.
Do you still meditate?
I still meditate twice a day.
No kidding.
Yes, and the reality is alternative medicines do work. And the thing is, we try to make them look like wacko medicine, woo-woo medicine, and the reality is prevention is the key. You know, let thy food be thy medicine. Do you know what the number one source of cancer is? Number one source.
Sugar?
Nope, food. I just spoke at the number one food conference in the world. I was a keynote, and a speaker broke before me. All the pesticides in the food, the way the food is manufactured, all this stuff is what creates cancer.
So you're a proponent of organic farming,
food.
local?
So I'm not left or right. My view is I believe in organic food, so I believe in clean food, and I believe in guns. So it may seem contradictory, right?
I'm with you. I believe in the same thing.
And I don't think these are contradictory things.
And exercise and meditation.
Exercise, meditation, these things have proven to work for thousands of years versus what we do is we force people to go through invasive procedures and we give them tons of drugs.
Okay, let's move on to a different subject because I only have you for another 8 minutes. Climate change. Earth Day was the first Earth Day was in 1970, and the gentleman who conceived it was a Nobel laureate biology professor at Harvard. Go figure. And he said civilization will end within 15 or 30 years unless immediate action is taken against problems facing mankind. This is a subject that you know a lot about.
I do. And that guy, by the way, I think 2 years ago, he said he was completely wrong. It was a Gaia hypothesis, a guy who came up with that.
George Wald?
Yeah, there's another guy too.
Paul Ehrlich?
Yeah, I think Paul. So here's the deal. If people want to go online, they can look at a video I did a month ago when Trump pulled out of the Paris Accords.
Good for
and
Trump.
I completely supported it. And I did a beautiful, I considered a very beautiful, succinct video presentation. I explain the racket of the Paris Accords. Look, you're talking to someone who's against the fact there's no safety assessment standards for GMOs. So that's a very liberal issue, but I'm also against the Paris Accords, and here's why. When you actually look at the science and you ask anyone, tell me one benefit of the Paris Accords, there is no benefit. If you ask someone, why should you use Tide detergent, they'll say, well, it cleans clothes. But there's no reality. Let's look at the Paris Accords. Today, we have China, for example, dumps 11 billion tons of carbon. India does, I believe, 2 billion. We do 4 billion tons of carbon. The Paris Accords allows China
to continue to
guess how much more they can dump, Lori.
Oh, I don't know. I didn't know that.
Another 11 billion.
Oh, great.
So they can go from 11 billion today up to 2030. They can go up to 22 billion. So
this was a redistribution scheme, basically.
It's not even a redistribution. It's a corruption scheme. They wanted.
Why would they allow China to continue and increase?
Let me tell you why. Okay. So if you did it very simply, follow the money. These 100 some odd countries did not want to be part of the Paris Accords. Why? Because they would have to start paying a carbon tax starting 2030 to the, I'm going to put in double quotes, the IPCC, which includes Gore, the old Bush family. These guys had created a thing called carbon tax, which meant
that Governor Malloy, by the way, in Connecticut, would like to implement now.
Yeah. So
and a green bank.
Exactly. So what was going to happen was the collusion of the Gores and others of their people who came up with this global warming, frankly, lie, wanted the United States to set up a green fund, about $100 billion, and that green fund was going to be used to send money to the influencers and corrupt politicians in these countries who would then we're waiting for their payout, and those guys were supporting the Paris Accords. So here's the deal: just follow China.
That's what I was saying, the redistribution concept,
right? But
meanwhile, they're describing it as, climate change is against women, climate change causes violence.
Nonsense.
It's just unbelievable.
But if you just follow China, so China today, to anyone listening, if you look at the numbers, they dump 11 billion tons of carbon into the atmosphere. In 2030, per the Paris Accords, they're allowed to go up to 22 billion. So think about that. After 2030, then they have to start paying a carbon tax to this IPCC group. What is a carbon tax? A carbon tax is literally a piece of equity that's traded on the commodity market, and it's going to explosively grow. The people who support carbon tax are going to make $1 trillion.
These are hedge fund managers.
It's their hedge fund. So they want we as taxpayers to pay a down payment for these corrupt officials to support the carbon tax.
What is the video you're talking about?
So if you go online, I believe you look if you look at my name, Shiva Ayyadurai, Paris Accords, it's on YouTube. You can find it. I do a very nice video. If you want, we can post it on your website. But it's a very nice video that explains the racket, and everyone gets it. So I've had people who are liberals who thought this was good. After they've watched that video, they get it. It's a complete
but you have the
racket.
Politicians Trump had a hard time going up against the Republicans who are buying into the climate change garbage. But it started with Agenda 21.
Well, do you know
with Herbert Walker Bush?
The NASA scientist who came up with the climate change concept, he set the initial average temperature of the planet using 1950 to 1980 at 15 degrees. Okay, 15 degrees, and they predicted climate. The temperature is going to go up. Well, 1997, the temperature actually was going to go down. So what they do is
they fudged the numbers.
Even more horrible than that. In an email, the same scientist told all these people, well, the new average temperature is 14 degrees. So the temperature was 14.6. So 15 became the new 14. And a very nice guy, an American thinker called Arvind Kumar, wrote a very nice article about this. The 15 is a new 14. So they literally reset the average. So it's a complete scam.
It's a scam.
The reality is, look, if we want to solve better environment, we need innovation. So we need clean energy, we need clean coal,
we need water
fusion.
too.
We need innovation.
Yeah, and water is very important,
Right.
and there's so many innovative options there. There's so many. We didn't talk about opioids. We did not talk about, and that's a huge crisis.
I think the key thing is the key thing is the career politicians in the administrative state does not want to solve problems. They will only solve problems to the extent that they can stay in office. There are amazing solutions. There's a great doctor in Massachusetts who actually has a solution for opioid. He was a former head of the Washingtonian Hospital. You may know of him, Dr. Kishore.
Yeah, he's been on the show. He was on about 2 months ago.
He actually deployed it, was attacked by the Attorney General, thrown in jail for 8 months because he was actually going against the old models.
And he has a video coming out now.
Hero in America.
Hero in America.
So the thing is, there are solutions.
Yeah, I'm hoping that I can show his film in Connecticut, hopefully in New London, which 8 people went to the hospital last night in New London.
So there are solutions for the opioid crisis, but those in power actually want to support methadone because it generates revenue for other people. They want to support rehab, which has 95% recidivism. It doesn't work. But there are solutions.
It's almost like the criminal justice system. It's sort of like its own.
Yeah, they make money off the prison system, which gave money to Hillary Clinton.
Well, Shiva, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Lori. Thanks for having me.
I greatly appreciate it. Coming all the way down here. You're going to be on another show later on today.
I will, yeah. And anyone who's listening, Shiva for Senate, give us lots of money so we can defeat
What show
war.
are you on after this?
I'm on.
He's got to look up his calendar.
Yeah, it's live. Let me look it up right here. If I can get it on here. 1 second.
Today you can hear
Article
more of Shiva.
5 Hour. It's called Article 5 Hour. It's on Talk 1100 KFNX. 1100 KFNX AM.
Okay, where's that? In Massachusetts?
Yeah, I think it's in Massachusetts. No, actually, it's on Phoenix Radio.
Oh, right.
We're going national.
It's
with
everywhere.
everything we do.
It's interesting.
Okay.
What a fascinating conversation.
Thank you, Lord.
Thank you for joining us today on Lori and Liberty, and listen every Sunday from 1 to 3 on 94.9 News Now and Stimulating Talk. Appreciate your calls today also.
You're the home of the brave.